On October 1st, 331 BC, on a barren plain in what is now northern Iraq, 47,000 men prepared to charge into an army more than twice their size. By sunset, the greatest empire the world had ever known would lie shattered in the dust. This wasn't a siege that dragged on for months or a campaign that spanned years. This was a single afternoon where one man's terrifying genius transformed the impossible into inevitable slaughter. What happened at Gaugamela wasn't just a battle. It was the moment when Alexander of Macedon looked into the eyes of Darius III, King of Kings, and watched an empire of 50 million souls crumble in mere hours. The body count would be staggering: 40,000 Persian dead or captured. Only 1,200 Macedonians fallen. These numbers should be impossible. They defy every principle of ancient warfare. But they're real, and understanding how this massacre unfolded will reveal something darker about human conflict than any Hollywood battle scene could capture. 2 years before this day of reckoning, Alexander and Darius had met at Issus, where the Persian king had suffered a humiliation that haunted his every waking moment. He'd fled the battlefield like a terrified animal, abandoning his own mother, his wife, and his daughters to the mercy of his enemy. For 730 days, that shame festered in Darius's soul. Now, in the autumn heat of Mesopotamia, he'd assembled the largest military force the ancient world had ever witnessed. This time would be different. This time, Alexander would die screaming. The Persian Empire had endured for 220 years, stretching from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India, from the frozen Caucasus to the burning deserts of Egypt. Darius commanded the loyalty of hundreds of ethnic groups, spoke for 50 million subjects, and possessed wealth that would make modern nations weep with envy. His administrative system was the most efficient the world had known. His army drew from every corner of 3 continents, and he'd chosen the battlefield himself. For months, Persian engineers had labored on the plains of Gaugamela, whose name meant the camel's house. They'd flattened every bump, smoothed every irregularity, removed every stone and obstacle until the ground stretched flat and perfect as far as the eye could see. This wasn't just preparation, it was the creation of an execution ground. Here, Darius's 200-sided chariots would race unimpeded, their wheel-mounted blades designed to shred human flesh like wheat before a scythe. Here, his cavalry would envelop the Macedonians like a closing fist and crush them into oblivion. Here, the numerical advantage would finally tell, and that arrogant boy-king would learn what it meant to challenge the might of Persia. The Persian force was obscene in its magnitude. Alexander arrived with 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Men who'd marched from Macedonia through Anatolia, who'd conquered Tyre and Egypt, who believed their king was touched by the divine. They were outnumbered at minimum to 2-1, possibly 3-1 or worse. Any rational commander would have sought terms, negotiated, retreated to fight another day. But Alexander wasn't rational. He was something far more dangerous, he was certain. As September faded into October, Persian scouts reported the enemy approach. Darius ordered his men to battle stations, keeping them awake through the night in expectation of a surprise attack. The Persian soldiers stood in formation through the darkness, muscles cramping, fear building, exhaustion seeping into their bones. Alexander let his men sleep. He knew that the greatest weapon wasn't always the sharpest blade. Sometimes it was simply being well rested when your enemy was falling apart from fatigue and terror. On the night before the battle, the Persian watchfires stretched beyond the horizon, an ocean of flickering lights that seemed to extend forever. In Darius's luxurious command tent, generals spoke with confidence bordering on arrogance. How could 47,000 defeat an army whose camp alone required hours to walk across? The mathematics were simple, brutal, final. In Alexander's tent, there was only cold calculation. He'd studied the Persians for years, understood their strengths, cataloged their weaknesses, identified the psychological pressure points that would make them break. Where Darius saw overwhelming force, Alexander saw opportunities for exploitation. As dawn broke on October 1st, 331 BC, the two armies could finally see each other clearly. The Macedonians gazed upon a force that stretched beyond comprehension, glittering bronze and steel catching the early light, standards and banners of 100 nations rippling in the morning breeze. Any sane man would have felt his bowels turn to water, but Alexander smiled. He'd been preparing for this specific morning since he was a child, listening to his father's war stories. The stage was set. The pieces were in position, and what was about to unfold would echo through the next 2,300 years, a master class in how tactical genius can transform numerical disadvantage into complete, total, merciless annihilation. If you were captivated by the kind of historical darkness that reveals the true nature of human conflict, the strategies that shaped empires, and the moments where everything hung on a knife's edge, then subscribe now and join our community. Hit that notification bell, because these stories of tactical brilliance and historical horror don't just entertain, they reveal truths about warfare that textbooks never capture. We're just getting started. What Alexander did next violated every principle of ancient warfare and revealed a mind that saw battlefields not as places of chaos, but as geometric problems with deadly solutions. As the armies deployed in the rising heat, he ordered his forces into an oblique formation. His right wing advanced, his left pulled back and refused. More shocking still, he positioned reserve forces behind each wing in flying columns that could respond to threats from any direction. He was creating flexibility in an age when armies fought in rigid, parallel lines. The Persians watched in confusion. Some laughed. Why was Alexander making his already shorter line even more compromised? Why expose his left flank? Darius himself reportedly smiled, thinking the Macedonian king had lost his nerve. They couldn't see the trap being constructed before their eyes, couldn't understand that every decision Alexander made was forcing Darius toward a single, fatal choice. Then Alexander did something that seemed to confirm Persian suspicions of his incompetence. He began marching his entire army to the right, away from the carefully prepared ground toward rougher terrain. The whole Macedonian force moved as one organism, maintaining perfect formation while sliding across the battlefield. This wasn't in any manual. Armies marched straight at each other and clashed. But Alexander was rewriting the rules in real time, and Darius found himself trapped between two impossible options. If he let Alexander reach the rough ground, the scythe chariots would be useless, their wheels catching and shattering on stones and ruts. But if he extended his line to mirror Alexander's movement, gaps would appear in his formation. Darius chose extension, and Alexander's eyes gleamed when he saw the Persian line stretch and thin. As the Persian left wing extended to match the Macedonian drift, Alexander fed in cavalry as bait. 600 mercenaries under Menidas struck and retreated, drawing 3,000 Bactrian horsemen into pursuit. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it was calculated provocation. The Bactrians chased, their blood up, and Alexander fed in more troops. The battle on the right became a swirling cavalry melee that served one purpose. It committed Persian forces away from their center, pulling them out of position like a chess player sacrificing a pawn to expose the king. Then Darius played what he thought was his winning move. He unleashed the scythe chariots. 200 war machines accelerated across the perfect ground, blades extending from wheels and axles, horses trained to charge through human formations without flinching. The sound of wheels on hard-packed earth created a thunder that veterans would hear in their nightmares for decades. Each chariot was a mobile death trap designed to shred infantry formations through sheer terror. But Alexander had drilled his men for exactly this horror. As the chariots bore down at full gallop, drivers whipping their teams into frenzy, the unexpected happened. The Macedonian phalanx didn't break, didn't scatter. At 50 yards, on command, they opened lanes in their formation, disciplined gaps just wide enough for a chariot to pass through. As the death machines thundered into these corridors, light infantry emerged from the sides with javelins and arrows, targeting horses first, then drivers. Chariots crashed, tumbled, shattered. Those that made it through found themselves in the Macedonian rear, surrounded by support troops who butchered the crews methodically. Of 200 chariots, Not one achieved its purpose. The psychological weapon that should have broken the Macedonian army had failed completely, and Darius had just revealed that his trump card was worthless. But the true brilliance was unfolding in ways the Persian king couldn't see through the rising dust. Alexander's oblique approach, his rightward drift, the cavalry battles on both flanks, the chariot attack, all of it was stretching the Persian line beyond its natural cohesion. An army 11 miles wide couldn't maintain perfect contact along its entire length, especially when units were being drawn away from position, and then it appeared. A gap in the Persian center, perhaps 300 yards wide, opened by the chaos of battle and the geometric inevitability of Alexander's maneuvering. It existed for perhaps minutes, maybe less, but Alexander saw it through the dust and blood and confusion, saw it with the clarity of a man who'd been engineering this exact moment for years. What happened next defined military genius for the next millennia. Alexander's voice cut through the battlefield roar, formed the wedge. His 2,000 companion cavalry wheeled into their signature formation with practiced precision. Alexander at the very point, his closest companions forming the cutting edge, ranks spreading wider behind like a spear aimed at the throat of Asia, and then they charged. The thunder of 2,000 war horses at full gallop shook the earth itself. Alexander rode Bucephalus, the black war horse that had carried him across the known world, man and mount thinking as one, consciousness bent on a single goal. Darius. The wedge hit the gap at full speed, punching through with the force of physics and fury combined. Behind them came the hypaspis, 3,000 elite infantry who'd kept pace with the cavalry charge through sheer conditioning, preventing the gap from closing, turning a cavalry raid into a breakthrough. Then came the phalanx, 9,000 men with 18-foot sarissa pikes lowered in unison, creating that unstoppable bronze hedgehog that had never broken. They poured through behind the cavalry, spreading left and right, rolling up the Persian line from within. Units that had been facing forward suddenly found themselves attacked from the side and rear simultaneously. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Warriors saw their center breached, saw the Macedonian king driving straight for their divine ruler, saw the impossible become inevitable, and doubt transformed into terror in heartbeats. Darius faced the moment every ruler dreads: fight or flee. Odysseus, he'd fled and saved his life, but lost his family and his honor. Now, watching Alexander carve through the immortals themselves with mechanical efficiency, watching his center collapse like a house of cards, Darius made the same choice again. He turned his chariot and fled, and with that single movement, the greatest empire on earth began to die. When soldiers saw their king of kings abandoning them, running like a coward for the second time, something broke in the Persian army that could never be repaired. Entire units simply dissolved. Men threw down their weapons and ran. The disciplined withdrawal became a rout. The rout became a slaughter. Alexander's cavalry pursued with ruthless efficiency, cutting down fleeing soldiers for miles. The body count grew beyond counting. 40,000 Persian dead or captured. Ancient sources described the ground so thick with bodies that horses stumbled on corpses. The dust turned to mud with blood, and Alexander's losses: 1,200 men. The mathematical impossibility of that ratio, more than 30 to 1, speaks to what happens when genius meets terror, when discipline faces disintegration. In 8 hours, Alexander hadn't just won a battle. He destroyed an empire that had endured for 220 years, shattered the illusion of Persian invincibility so completely it could never be rebuilt. Within months, Babylon opened its gates without resistance. Persepolis fell. Darius, hunted and desperate, was murdered by his own generals. The Achaemenid Empire ended not with a whimper, but with the thunder of hooves on that October day. But here's what haunts about Gaugamela beyond the tactics and the body count. Alexander created that killing field with such precision that military academies still teach his maneuvers 2,300 years later. He turned war into mathematics, human bodies into variables in geometric equations, and proved that sometimes the most terrifying weapon, in size or strength, but a mind that can see 7 moves ahead while standing in the dust and blood of the present. What do you think? Could any commander in history have matched Alexander's tactical brilliance at Gaugamela, or was this a once-in-human history convergence of genius, timing, and opportunity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story revealed something about the darkness of military genius that you'd never considered before, share it with someone who needs to understand that history's greatest victories were also its most calculated horrors.